We're going to begin today with Professor Jill Campbell. She is a professor of English, and she teaches and writes about a variety of genres in 18th century British literature, the novel, drama, poetry, familiar letters, and other forms of life writing. Her interest in women's writing and the construction of gender in literature are part of a broader interest in the complex interactions between literary experience and social forms. She's the author of Natural Masks, Gender and Identity in Fielding's Play and Novels. And she's also actively interested in the discussion of practical pedagogy for the teaching of reading, writing, and interpretive skills to people of all ages. This year, she will be leading a seminar titled Writing About Nature. Jill, I am turning everything over to you.
Thank you, Jason. Can people hear me? Great. I am really wondering how you all are doing, but this isn't a setting in which we can talk about that, but my thoughts have been with you as school reopens. I just have 4 or 5 main ideas or observations that I want to share about this general topic, and I'm going to move through them in a few minutes and amplify just a little bit on each of them. You'll see they kind of flow into each other, and I'll be happy to take questions if you have them at the end. But I actually wanted to start with 2 poems. And though I am an English professor, this seminar will not consist entirely of poems. They're just one of a number of different kinds of writing about nature that we will read together, including science writing and memoirs and journalism and fiction and so on. But I thought it might be nice to start with a couple of poems to get something in front of us. The poems are short. Some people feel poetry is sustaining in some way sometimes, and we could all use that. And I think these 2 poems have an interesting relation to each other. So I'm going to be getting back to them and making a few comments about why they interest me for thinking about the vast potential of this seminar as we look ahead a ways to that. So the first of the 2 poems happens to be the first poem I ever heard recited. In the 5th grade, my friend Georgia recited it at some kind of school event. And since then I have encountered it frequently. Maybe some of you have encountered it. It's a poem that continues to have a life in the world. I now hear it partly with a kind of Cockney hip hop intonation to it because it's been adapted by a London hip hop artist for ads for the Lake District. But anyway, here it is in my non-Cockney voice. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high or veils in hills when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. The waves beside them danced, but they outdid the sparkling waves in glee. A poet could not but be gay in such a jocund company. I gazed and gazed, but little thought what wealth the show to me had brought. For oft, when on my couch I lie, in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon that inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude. And then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils. So that's a poem from 1804 by William Wordsworth, often a kind of go-to author for thinking about writing about nature. And here's a much more contemporary poem by the young, brilliant poet Jericho Brown. This is his book, The Tradition, and it's the title poem. And these are 2 poems about flowers. You met daffodils and daffodils and daffodils in the last poem. And here is Brown's take on flowers. This volume, which includes a lot of the terror and violence of Black contemporary life, and sexual violence, also includes family drama also includes lots of flowers and lots of beauty and lots of trees and lots of sense of nature. So here, Jericho Brown's The Tradition. It's a sonnet, so it's short. It's a really hard poem, so if you don't follow it all, fine, hear what you hear in it. Aster, nasturtium, delphinium. We thought fingers in dirt meant it was our dirt, learning names in heat. In elements classical philosophers said could change us. Stargazer, foxglove. Summer seemed to bloom against the will of the sun, which news reports claimed flamed hotter on this planet than when our dead fathers wiped sweat from their necks. Cosmos, baby's breath. Men like me and my brothers filmed what we planted for proof we existed before too late. Sped the video to see blossoms brought in seconds, colors you expect in poems where the world ends, everything cut down. John Crawford, Eric Garner, Mike Brown. So it ends with a different recitation of names, and I'll get, as I say later, I'll get back to just a few little observations about this poem. It's an amazing poem, and I'll leave you thinking about it. But there we have those two poems about flowers from 2020, Pulitzer Prize winning American poet and a British romantic poet. But I want to turn now to this sequence of kind of broad points or observations I want to make about this seminar as I have conceived it and I'm offering it to you and other teachers and potential fellows. The first thing I want to say about the topic I proposed, writing about nature, is that it is obviously a vast subject. Maybe that's why I wanted to start with two little poems. And it's one that we will be able to take on only very selectively in the course of our meetings and work together. I feel both really excited about the potential of taking on this topic right now with some of you, and rather humbled or even daunted by the scope of the topic that I have dared to announce for the seminar. But then I remember, and Stephanie and Jim will know this, and maybe some of those of you who have been fellow travelers in the Institute with me before, I've led seminars on what seemed impossibly big topics before, with a sense that they were so capacious that people could come at them from lots of different angles and bring your interest to them and kind of constitute them through the population of who's in the seminar. And I recall that it works. It works to give shape in my advanced planning to the course of study and reading and discussion that we're going to have by having a sequence of subtopics or kind of a loose cluster of subtopics, facets, dimensions defined in different ways so that we can navigate the landscape, to use a kind of natural image, and explore it together and have a kind of cumulative shared sense, and then have those different facets available for individual seminar members to draw on and to go further with in their own set of interests and particularly their curriculum plans. So I haven't yet fully settled on what all of those facets or subtopics will be, what you might call modules or just parts in the sequence of the seminar, although I've thought about that and I have some ideas and some I've settled on pretty clearly already. But my decisions will, of course, be informed by who is going to be in the seminar. There's just an embarrassment of riches of things we could look at together. When I've seen applications, I'll have a sense of what to foreground, what to emphasize, what to expand on, and make decisions that seem to match the group that we come to be. And I'll also leave some space in our planned shared readings so that we can develop in directions where we're just not satisfied with where we stopped, or maybe we left something out altogether. So I imagine these still still hypothetical fellows of this seminar could represent a whole range of teaching. And that could just be wonderful, both across the range of ages of the students that different ones of you teach, and certainly also a range of subject matter. Of course, language arts or English, Spanish, history, also life sciences, biology, maybe marine biology, if that's something you get to teach, earth sciences. There's just a lot of, if some of you teach environmental studies, of course, that's appropriate. So that leads me into the second kind of broad thing I want to say about this topic. It's vast, and it's also necessarily interdisciplinary. So if we turn out to be an interdisciplinary group in a seminar, or a real mix of people who are experts in different subjects, doing different kinds of teaching in the classroom, that would be very fitting and very, very promising. Of course, I myself am an English teacher, and so I teach reading, writing, and interpretation, and I'm a literary scholar. But within my own discipline, this topic right now is part of a movement that has been called, given various names, eco-criticism, eco-poetics, environmentalist literary criticism that's really began to emerge in the 1970s, but has really gained more and more critical mass, and is really important and growing and developing right now. And that field, which we'll look at a bit and draw on, but that field defines itself as an interdisciplinary field. So it isn't just the literary study of the theme of nature. Wordsworth wrote a poem about daffodils. You have to talk about nature if you talk about Wordsworth, but really thinking about the representation of literature, the representations in literature of nature as part of the material world, the real nature, what's happening to nature. So it's this field which has a kind of ethical aspect to it. It's very important to it that it be interdisciplinary, not strictly literary. So it's fitting for us, if we can be an interdisciplinary group, whatever form that takes, we'll make the most of it. Just as an example, kind of a far-flung example of the kind of interest of this field that leads me on to my next main point I wanted to underline about the seminar, to hark way back to the late 18th century. There's a French novel, which is, I'm told, one of the most popular French novels of all time, late 18th century, called Paul et Virginie. And the plot of that novel culminates in a hurricane, which has just, has crucial dramatic effects for the plot on the island of Mauritius in the Indian Ocean where it is set. And the eco-critical readings of this long ago novel emphasize that hurricanes weren't just natural disasters in the time, they were increasing in the late 18th century in this part of the world because of colonization of the island of Mauritius by the Dutch, the French, the English, others, and the plantation landscapes that were being newly imposed increased the hurricanes. So this is, to bring that requires some scientific understanding and historical understanding to this novel. That's just an example for you of the way this way of thinking about literature, about nature, is necessarily interdisciplinary. So as I say, that brings me to my next point, which is the timeliness of this topic. It's always timely to think about however we define nature, the natural world, human beings existing in a so-called natural world. But in 2022, the changes that are occurring in nature, in the natural world, the earth, are urgent and coming more and more to the fore. So we're in the era that many now call the Anthropocene, the era, the geological era, in which the conditions of the earth are largely defined and impacted by human activity. So to try to think about what it means to write about nature, to read about nature, to regard nature, to even imagine what nature is in that time feels very urgent. We're seeing, of course, climate change and rapid loss of biodiversity. The natural world is absorbing an impact that leads to what some have said will be the 6th major extinction on the planet. So we will wrestle with that alongside visions of daffodils that sustained William Wordsworth when he went back to lie on his couch. What does it mean for plants, animals, insects to be threatened, to be at the verge of extinction? And we'll do some very selective reading in up-to-date writing about that, both journalistic and scientific writing about that climate emergency we're in and how it's changing nature. And we'll also do some very selective reading. We could have a whole seminar, 13 weeks of this alone, but it'll just be one part of things, to go back to some of the classic ecological writing, the kind of introduction of notions of ecology. Writers such as Rachel Carson, Aldo Leopold, and E.O. Wilson, who happens to have just died a week or so ago, and draw on their way of imagining ecosystems, which we are having to recognize in the news every day, more and more are affected by what happens to each part. I have been talking a long time, so I won't read you this, but I had selected a beautiful little passage from E.O. Wilson's, kind of in honor of his recent passing, controversial as he is. I selected a little excerpt to read you from his book on the diversity of life. I won't read it to you, but I'll just summarize for you. It is his minutely precise description, detailed description of what he sees in a handful of dirt in his hand. So it reminds us that observation of the natural world can take place in a city. It could be a handful of city dirt full of life forms interrelated, and that it takes place, the emphasis in his passage is on the interrelations among the different organisms in that dirt. So we will certainly have probably an initial unit, substantial unit on observation, on the observation of nature, which is something that goes across the different disciplines in which we might write. And I'll just mention this wonderful anthology that I hope to use. I haven't finally decided on the book yet, but Black Nature, 4 Centuries of African-American Nature Poetry, edited by Camille Dungy. And the first section of that is what she calls just looking. So thinking about observation. So that brings me to my last broad feature I wanted to underline about my conception of this seminar, which is an aspiration. It's a challenge and an aspiration. It's to widen out from what is a kind of familiar literary canon of white British and white American nature writers, the Romantic poets, we will read them, the 19th century transcendentalists like Thoreau, we will read Thoreau, but to widen out from that and recognize all the people, all the different voices, the people in different cultures with different histories who have written about nature and often have been excluded from what is imagined to be writing about nature. So we'll look with wide interest and curiosity and respect for what different cultures can offer us as ways to think about the natural world and man's relation to it. So I'll just end with very quick remarks on those 2 poems that I started you off with for Wordsworth. As I think you will have heard in those stanzas, the daffodils become an inner resource for him as he remembers them later. So there's that notion of poetry, notion in Romantic poetry and later, and maybe some of us have felt it, that the experience of nature becomes an internal resource? Is that something we want for ourselves and our students? Is that something that makes sense in their lives? We might wish for it. And alongside that, Jericho Brown's poem, which emphasizes this love even for the names of the flowers that he intones, and a wish to be included in that tradition of writing about this exquisite, endlessly diverse natural world, and also an awareness that that tradition is inextricable from traditions of oppression of certain peoples and failures of recognition and violence that is done on land. And he's wrestling in this sonnet with what kind of strength and pleasure and beauty he can draw from nature. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you for your patience with my rather lengthy introduction. You can see I'm very enthusiastic about all that it could be.
And Jill, thank you very much. Very interesting presentation. And I do have a few questions that came in. So we have some enthusiastic listeners here from your presentation. One of them is, would it be a strong possibility to do a social studies unit through the lenses of environmental impacts on people and culture?
Okay, my delay is that I managed to leave the Zoom session for a moment, but I'm right back. I could actually hear your voice, Jason. And yes, absolutely, yes. I didn't mention in my kind of quick look around an imaginary seminar room of the life sciences people and the history people and the language arts people and the Spanish people who teach Spanish, but definitely social sciences. That's there too, and how have different peoples experienced nature in different settings and different cultures. So I would say yes. As always with these questions, it would be a matter of writing a description of what that curriculum unit, that just inchoate beginning curriculum unit idea would be, and having some conversation and recognition about how this would fit into the seminar. But on principle, yes.
Wonderful, thank you. And one other question that came through is, what particular writing genres are you planning to focus upon?
So as I said at the beginning, I chose some poems because they're short, but my hope is to be, and we can't do everything in 13 weeks, but my hope is to be very eclectic and include, and I think I kind of reeled off, the kind of journal writing like Thoreau's Walden, and variations on that, Annie Dillard's Tinker at Pilgrim Creek, and others in that, memoir, journalistic reporting, some science writing, and of course my own expertise is limited there, but science writing that is accessible to all of us, fiction, and I would really like to include some children's books. And again, that will depend on just the constituency of the group, but I have in mind the chapter books, Little House on the Prairie, paired with Louise Erdrich's The Birch Bark House, which retells that classic children's chapter book from the point of view of an Ojibwa family in the same territory. So a wide range. I'm probably forgetting other things, but the hope is to be very eclectic and exploratory.
Wonderful. All right, Jill, thank you very much.
Thank you.